ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ. Thank you all for logging into this Sikh Research Institute webinar today. My name is Japji Singh and I will be the host and moderator for today's session. The presentation will begin shortly, but before we get started, I wanted to review a few housekeeping items and let you know how you can participate in today's web event. I will then provide some information about the Sikh Research Institute and Ravinder Singh before handing over for the main presentation. So we're looking at an example of the GoToWebinar attendee interface, which is made up of two parts. The viewer window on the left, which allows you to see everything the presenter will share on their screen, and the control panel at the right. Within that control panel is how you can participate in today's event. So let's look at that. By clicking on the orange arrow, you can open and close your control panel. From the view menu, you can also set the control panel not to auto hide when inactive if you prefer to keep it open. The audio pane provides audio information. By default, you have joined the webinar via mic and speakers. Click the audio setup to select your computer speaker or headset devices. If you prefer, you can join the audio via telephone by selecting Use Telephone, and the dial-in information will be displayed, including the audio pin. During the presentation, if you have any questions, you may send them to me through the questions pane. Simply type in your question and click send. Ravinder Singh will be answering all questions during the QA session, during and at the end of the main presentation. As a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded and everyone will receive an email within 7 days with a link to view the recording of today's event. If for any reason you experience any technical difficulties during the session and you can't see the main presentation, for example, then please do not hesitate to contact me via the chat panel. If you lose your internet connection or have to restart a computer during this session, then you can rejoin the session by clicking the URL that is included in your original registration confirmation email. Finally, at the end of the presentation, Ravinder Singh will launch a testimonial. In fact, a bit of correction, I will launch a testimonial and feedback window. We'd appreciate if you could take a few moments to provide your feedback and comments on how this session went and how we can improve future sessions. I'll now provide some background to the Institute and also Ravinder Singh. Over the last 7 years, SikhRI focused on community development through programs, leadership programs developing visionaries. They have trained 5,100 worldwide. Educational seminars stopping misinformation reached 365,000 globally. K-12 services teaching values and language skills. They have served 48 schools, 700 teachers, and over 2,700 students. Today's webinar is free of charge for all attendees, but not for SikhRI. If you get value out of today's session, I strongly urge you to consider donating to the website at www.sikhri.org. Let us begin today's session. Your presenter today will be Ravinder Singh. Ravinder Singh is the founder and convener of the Talking Stick, an online colloquium devoted to dialogue around Gurbani. The Talking Stick appears weekly at sikhchic.com. Before I begin, I have two short announcements. The first one is civic. We would like to take a moment before we start to invite you to join us in San Antonio, Texas, from August 5th through the 19th for an intensive immersion in Sikh culture, language, values, and community through heightened understanding of Bani, Tariq, and Rahat. When you register for Civic, you will be given an opportunity to select your focus for the classroom session from one of the 3 tracks of study, Sikhi 101, Sikhi 201, and Gurmukhi 101. then you will spend the first half of your day as a Sikh in specialized classroom sessions with others who have chosen the same track. Later in the afternoon, we will come together as a group of guest lecturers on everything from encouraging health in the Sangat to tips on starting your own non-profit or community service organization to conflict and dispute resolution strategies. Each Sikh also features special nights set aside for talent shows, ultimate frisbee, a trip into downtown San Antonio, and other fun and relaxing activities. Every year we hear back from Sikh alumni about how valuable the bonds they've formed as Sikh have been long after they've left in terms of friendships, networking, and continued academic and spiritual development. Though Sikh is a 2-week commitment, it is designed to inspire a lifetime of curiosity and learning. As a Sikh, as a member of a community, and as a citizen of the world. Please visit our website for more details. The registration form is live and we are currently accepting applications for all tracks. Don't forget to like us on Facebook too to get news like upcoming Sikh announcements, videos, and stay hip to new resources in general like this live webinar you're about to attend, which SikhRI is putting out for learners everywhere. The second announcement is question and answer protocol. We strongly encourage you to help make today's session interactive. 30 minutes into the presentation, you will have the ability to start asking questions pertaining to slides covered. If you have general questions, we urge you to wait until the end of the presentation. In the side panel or in the questions pane, please state your name, city, and question. If you'd like to verbally ask a question, please confirm that you have a microphone. Please address all questions to me so I can compile them for our presenter, Ravinder Singh. Now I'd like to pass it over to Ravinder Singh to begin today's presentation. Please bear with me while this transition takes a few seconds. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I just want to make sure that you can hear me.
We can hear you, Guruji.
Okay, can I proceed then?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay. Once again, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh to all of you who are online right now. Absolute pleasure to be here, and I do thank you very much for taking the time to actually join with me and SikhRI in this series of live seminars, or webinars rather. I'm quite accustomed to calling them seminars. Webinar is a fairly new concept to me. I, of course, would have hoped that we could be face-to-face as we talked about the subject that we're about to embark on. But under the circumstances, I suppose we'll just do with what we have. Just a short comment on my photograph that I just saw. I look rather angry. Let me assure you, generally I'm quite happy. So that must have been the moment. Without much ado, I'm going to start on what we are going to talk about. Is Sikhi a religion? Why did I choose this title? Very simple. I felt that choosing it would provoke you into thinking a little bit, because after all, isn't Sikhi a religion already? I mean, we refer to it quite often as the 5th largest religion, and it has all the markers of an organized religion. You know, it has its theology, it has its institutions, and it has its own ritual. So why would I even consider asking that question? But the fact of the matter is that Gurbani is, as you all know, very thought-provoking, and the Japji, which I suppose we all recite regularly in the morning. If we don't, we should. Is so thought-provoking that just about every other day that I read it, I come across lines that catch my attention. And the lines that I've quoted here, Mannay, mugg, challey, panth, Mannay, Dharam, seti, sanbandh, and I've offered 2 translations down below, which are my own, kind of gave me pause because I wanted to actually try and figure out what exactly was Baba Nanak trying to point to, because he's obviously referring to different ways, and he's referring to something that is not a particular way, but the way. So with that in mind, I thought it would make for an interesting conversation with you folks. I'm hoping that some of your feedback will also cause me to learn some stuff. So now let's move on to talking about how we are going to approach this discussion today. So what I'm going to do is essentially talk about some different concepts here that we need to actually consider in order to understand the true import of the lines Mannay, mugg, challey, panth. And I suggest that we are going to touch on at least stanzas 8 through 16 of the Japji Sahib, although I assure you this is not going to be an exposition of those stanzas, but there are concepts in there that we need to understand in order to appreciate what's being said in these two lines. And the concepts that I'm referring to are the concepts of Suniye, Mannay, panth, and Dharam. So I think these are interrelated in these stanzas, so we will talk about those. What I also wish to do is spend a little bit of time, very little, just touch on how religions have evolved to being organized institutions and what sort of an impact it has had on us individuals. And then what does it really mean to be a Sikh? I've suggested this is a recommendation, but purely because it's based entirely on my own experience as a Sikh, as a practicing Sikh. And I would just share with you what my experience is. And then we will go on to actually talk about Dharam and what it means in the context of our daily lives. Because to me, if we can't relate Gurbani or Guru Nanak's message to my daily life, and I mean very intimately my daily life, then it really doesn't have much value to me. I mean, I'm not likely to look at it. And my suggestion is that Guru Nanak's teachings have a lot of value to our daily lives. So with that said, let's move on and start considering some of these concepts that I've spoken about. So the first concept that we need to really understand is the notion of Mannay or Mannay. Here, before I get on to Mannay, very quickly let me dispose of the idea of mugg and panth. As you know, the Mannay stanzas, follow the Suniye stanzas in Japji Sahib, and I know that all of you are familiar with this, so I'm not going to belabor that point. But just so that we're on the same page, let me just quickly touch on mugg and panth. And in this line, mugg and panth are synonymous terms to denote different religious paths, okay? So Mannay, mugg, challey, panth. So the question is, what is Mannay, or who is Mannay, or is Mannay a state of mind that doesn't walk on these different paths? We need to consider that. And before we do that, just a word of caution. I at least am very sensitive to the fact that no matter how we try to define any term in Gurbani, especially terms like Mannay, we just do not have English equivalents that exactly tell you what it means. So we just have to live with approximations that really suggest the real meaning. These are just pointers and intimations. So with that, with that kind of qualifier, my own sense of Mannay, at least the way I see it, is that it signifies an experience or a state of consciousness or awareness that results from Suniye. So the question is, okay, so Suniye, how does that result in money and what does it mean? Suniye, which I don't want to really dwell on for this webinar, I just have described as attentive listening. And the reason I call it attentive listening is because I want to signify it as a very dynamic process as opposed to the very passive process of just hearing something. And Suniye is where Guru Nanak begins to give us hints of how to start this inner journey that he's talking about, this pilgrimage of self-discovery. And so with Suniye, what happens is we are heeding our inner voice, we travel inwards, and in doing so, we actually plumb the depths of our own beings. And what that does is it heals the fractured relationship that we have with Waheguru, which is often signified by the term haume, another very important term, but we won't go there right now. So with Suniye, what happens is a metamorphosis occurs in us, an inner change, a shift in our orientation occurs. And Mannay signifies that shift. So you can think of Mannay being a state of absorption, a state of acceptance. Different terms have been used to describe it, but it really describes the state of an individual who, through Suniye, has really communed with Nam, with the word. And it is this shift that we need to talk about. And the shift is very significant, and because it takes you away from acquired belief, which is organized religion, which is why I'm questioning if it is indeed a religion. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. So you shift from acquired belief to what I, for want of a better term, call authentic faith. You shift from just meaning, which is intellectual, to experience. You shift from passive hearing to active absorption. So you are not simply the passive receiver of cultural scripts, but in fact, you are now writing your own script. So in short, the way to describe this in Gurmat terminology is to say that from being a manmukh, you've become a gurmukh. Okay? So that's really what the whole notion of Mannay seems to me. At least that is my understanding. Okay? This, you could think of it as a peak experience that very rare individuals have. And it appears to me that Guru Nanak here, Babaji, is basically recommending to us that through the art of attentive listening, Suniye, communing with the word, Nam, and I know I'm using Christian terminology here, so bear with me, that there aren't just any better words yet. We need to cultivate this capacity of being in the state of manan. In Punjabi, it's manan. And it is this capacity that we generally lack. We do not have this capacity. We are not born with it, but this is something that we need to do to essentially cultivate. So the question becomes, in my mind, do religions, especially organized religions as we understand them, do they really help us to cultivate this experience of Mannay? And I would say to you, at least from my experience, not really. I don't think that they do. And we'll go into why I think they don't do. Just touch very briefly on why, just on how religions develop, okay? I'm not going to spend too much time on this. As you can see, what happens is you have a primary experience, through prophets that we know about. I've got this little sub-bullet here that says the ordinary becomes extraordinary. Because to me, what is this primary peak experience? It seems to me that it is when in your ordinary life becomes extraordinary, when the world around you starts appearing to be extraordinary. So the fact of the matter is, that the individuals that I've listed here, they've had an experience, a revelation, if you will, that has inspired them, that has made them see this world as being extraordinary. To all of us, conditioned as we are and living as somewhat, in a somewhat automated, robotic fashion, life is, pretty humdrum. Not for them, because they've had this peak experience. So that happens, and then what happens? Very quickly, they've got a group of followers, Sikhs who surround them. We know that Guru Nanak had, Sikhs that followed him. I think the number that is referred to is 19 when he died, who are hardcore followers, but nonetheless, there are followers. And then soon after that, you have a theology that's developed, things have to be systematized, and we see that development in all the major religions that leads to institutions. And ultimately, the institutions, whether we like it or not, tend to become political. That's what essentially happens in how organized religions evolve. So with that background, let's move into this slide here. I'm going to share a bit of an experience here, because I think what organized religions do to us individually is they hand us scripts that come from our parents, from our education, from our environments. So let me just share with you, where I'm going with all of this is I'm trying to bring you to the point to see what happens when we do not question organized religion, when we just accept it. So, I will give you an experience that I had many years ago, which really triggered this thinking in my head. I was at an interfaith gathering, and someone asked me quite casually, "Are you a Sikh by birth?" And like always, my instinct was to say, "Yeah." But then something just caused me to hesitate for a moment. Yes, indeed, I thought to myself, I was born in a Sikh milieu, and to all outward appearances, I am a Sikh. You can recognize me as one. So where was the problem in just giving the individual a conventional yes? The question seemed innocuous enough. But, and I don't know where this thought came from, and I shared with you, I began to think, and I said, the answer, yes, I'm a Sikh by birth, would be very misleading if nothing else. Because for one thing, it would imply that Sikhi, or being a Sikh, is simply a birth of, an accident of birth. You're born a Sikh and you're a Sikh. In other words, it's a fait accompli. And for another, I think it did not, the answer, yes, I'm a Sikh by birth, does not take into account the fact that Sikhi involves a lifelong apprenticeship to the Guru. It's a commitment to a way of life, and it's a commitment to the sort of authentic transformation that we are talking about. So I just felt that the answer was very deficient. And I began to question some of this as I, dwelled on this question. And I'm sure that a lot of you have thought the same way. And one of the things that I kind of wrestled with was, well, gee, I was born to Sikh parents, so is it a surprise that I have imbibed, the formality of being a Sikh? But what if I had been a non-Sikh? If I had been born in a non-Sikh family, I'd probably do the same, right? So, not a big deal, but being a conscious Sikh, that, on the other hand, is quite a different matter, right? To be a conscious Sikh means I have to make deliberate choices, and I have to shift my focus. I have to move away from just being a believer, which is what I am as a born Sikh, to a seeker of truth. And, it means then that I have to basically embark on this inner journey through Sunya that we just spoke about. As a believer, I'm pretty cocksure about things. I can tell you my religion is the best versus yours, right? But when you start traveling inwards, you are, besetted with all kinds of doubt, with all kinds of fears. So it's a tough road to get onto, but that's what an authentic Sikh life is all about. You have to be able to bring your head, heart together. And I think that is what organized religion doesn't do. What it does is it expects you to just be obedient to codified beliefs. You can't question. We know that conformity and certitude has some advantages, but questioning is not encouraged in organized religion. Obedience is a big virtue. But there are problems with this kind of thinking, to my mind. I feel that by being a believer, by not questioning, even though the religion may offer me a navigation tool, it may give me a legitimate worldview, it really is actually not doing what religions are supposed to do. And within the context of our own religion, Sikhi, I would suggest to you that belief systems actually serve to coagulate, to actually strengthen our sense of separate self. They don't dissolve it. I don't think that we are encouraged to question the Kur Dipal that Guru Nanak, has advised us to demolish at the very outset of the Japji Sahib. And so what happens is we become very obedient believers. We just accept what is handed down, and we rarely, if ever, break out of that mold. And I think this is where I was questioning, is Sikhi just this religion, or is it something more that Guru Nanak is suggesting? So let's move on to Dharam, which is the other concept that I wanted to talk about. These seem a little disjointed right now, but we'll try and pull them together. I want to make sure that we lay out these concepts a little bit before we actually try and pull them together. Again, I'm not aware of, I'm sure all of you understand what Dharam means, but I'm just trying to get everyone on the same page. So very quickly, the concept of Dharam, very old one, has an ancient lineage in our thought, in Indian thought. And the word itself is derived from the Sanskrit dhri, which means that which holds together, something that holds together, and is used to mean the way things are or the natural order of things. In other words, we refer to that also as natural law. But over time, a second, somewhat narrow meaning has also come to attach itself to it. It also means duty or one's role in society. In the old tradition. So how does Guru Nanak use this term? It seems to me he certainly uses it in the first sense, namely, Dharam is what holds and sustains the physical universe. But he also uses it in a different sense, somewhat like duty, but not in the old traditional sense. He uses it to denote moral and ethical law. Where Dharam becomes the product of compassion. And then in stanza 16, which we'll touch on a little later, he elaborates how Dharam really works. And then for those of you very familiar with Japji, will recognize that in stanza 34, he touches on Dharam again. Here he calls it Dharam Khand, or the plane of Dharam, which at least to my way of understanding, refers to our world of time, space, and mind, which is what we inhabit. And so the planet Earth is an arena for the practice of righteous action, dharma. That's how Guru Nanak sees it. He also sees the body, the human body in Gurbani is also referred to as Dharam, because the same divine spark that animates the universe also infuses our body. And it is in this body that we make choices that ultimately determine our fate. So the usage is a little different. The old Hindu notion of dharma really refers to adhering to one's caste laws, okay, so laws of action. It was somewhat similar to how the animal kingdom and the animal species really operate. The idea was that if you conform perfectly to your dharma as the animal species do, because they are just programmed to do that, as do plants and so on. It was thought that by just doing that, you were holding the natural order together. Now, this is a notion that Guru Nanak rejects. He rejects the idea of a fixed course of action based on caste affiliations. That needs to be very clear to us. Okay? For him, humans can make conscious, deliberate choices and are expected to make them. We are engaged in a Dharam yudh, so to speak. We have to make conscious choices. So if you want to think of Dharam, I would suggest to you, at least this is how I have understood it, it can be viewed as an awakening to incorporate or assimilate in our person the right orientation. And I want to touch very briefly on orientation. You know, in Gurbani, there are several orientations that are presented. You know, Manmukh, Gurmukh, Suhagan, Duhagan. These are different orientations. But Guru Amar Das, you know, refers to live and dhat. These are two ways that we can choose. Live being the way that takes us inwards to our source, and dhat, for want of a better explanation, I would suggest is the equivalent of a modern day rat race. So we have a choice of how we want to really engage with life around us. Okay. That said, I'm going to move on to the next slide because there's another concept that we want to talk about, and that is the concept of punch, which is stanza 16 of the Japji, and it has a relationship to Dharam, which is also in the same body of Japji Sahib, where Guru Nanak talks about Dal Dharam Daya Ka Poot Santok Thap Rakhya Jinsut. So let's move on to that slide. Punch, again, is a fairly old concept. I have often explained the punch to be the exemplars of Mannay, or those who embody the spirit of Mannay. These are people who have actually, these are iconic people who have experienced, who live in the state of Mannay, if you will. Okay, so interpreters of Gurbani have actually ascribed, you know, many different meanings to the word punch. Some think that it's derived from the word five, or the five elements in the mind. But it seems to me that, at least in my opinion, for whatever it's worth, that punch really denotes, as I said earlier, an exemplar or an iconic figure, someone worthy of being held up as an example. I mean, you know, a sant or a saint, for want of a better word. And in Gurbani, punch is also used to refer to those who are not caught up in the web of parpanch, which is used as a synonym for Maya, which is the illusion of reality that is created around us. And so Guru Nanak essentially is holding them out as exemplars for those who have really scaled the spiritual summit, if you will. And as an aside here, by the way, I just wanted to point out also that Guru Nanak's ideal of the punch was in fact the foundation for Guru Gobind Singh's selection of the Panj Pyare. So it was the Panj Pyare who had the moral authority, who carried the moral authority of the Guru to make decisions on behalf of the Sikh panth. Because, why? Because they are always attentive to Naam, Panchaga Gur Ek Dhyan, because that is where they live. So the reason I bring this up is that we have got to understand that Guru Nanak's Bani really provides the basis for all Sikh institutions. And you know, the later gurus have only sort of amplified and built on those. And in this stanza, with the punch, where I just mentioned Dal Dharam Daya Ka Poot, what we see is Guru Nanak's suggestion that any society can only be stable, not just societies, but perhaps the universe, rests on the power of Dharam, righteousness. And interestingly enough, Dharam, or righteousness, is born of compassion. Daya, Daul Dharam, Daya ka poot. And it is woven with the rope of contentment. Santok thap rakhya jin sukh. Okay, so it's extremely important to understand that Dharam is actually an offspring of compassion. And you know this as well as I do. Symbolically, all of these ethical virtues are personified in the names of our Panch Pyaras. Daya, Dharam, Himmat, Mokham, Sahib, who have indeed become exemplars of moral action. And this is something that a thought that I leave you with, something that I think you should dwell on in your spare time. This is very thought-provoking on how individuals who actually work in a moral way can actually help society. So we've touched on Panch, we've touched on Mannay, we've touched on organized religion and how it inhibits the cultivation of this experience. That's what I'm trying to drive at, is it actually inhibits because it doesn't really encourage this kind of inquiry into the self. So let's move on. And I have used this slide really just as a placeholder, because Dharam to me is the cultivation of the inner soil, basically, because as I said earlier, this is something that we have to move inwards, not outwards, to discuss. And Panch, we talked about as ideal people. So the Panch, by the way, in Gurbani are described variously. I picked out some synonyms for them just to share with you. You know, there's the word Satyar, there's the word Gurmukh, Sant, Bhagat, Gursikh, Jan, Sevak, Brahmgyani. So primarily the Gurmukh ideal, as reflected through all of these synonyms for Panch, is the fact that they are integrated personalities who, combine knowledge, action, and devotion. And I talked to you about the two orientations available to us: the movement inwards, live, cultivation of the inner environment, and that is what the Panch do. And it is these inner virtues that I've listed here that give a Gurmukh the necessary purity of motive and the integrity of action. You've got to remember, you have to be selfless in order to be able to act with moral authority and moral imperative on behalf of others. So it is the cultivation of these virtues, which collectively I would call Dharam, that give a Panch or a Gurmukh the purity of motive. It also gives the Panch integrity in action. It also gives the Panch the autonomy to transcend dogma. Hence, Mannay, mugg, na challey, panth. Okay? It frees him from dogma. It frees this individual, the Panch, and I know I used the word him, but that's just a force of habit. It frees the Panch from materialistic bias, and it frees the Panch from what can become narcissistic self-obsession, haume. We are all sort of there, right? We were sort of in many ways neurotic and narcissistic in the way we live lives. So to put it another way, so what a Panch or a Gurmukh can do is pull away from the lure of established mental patterns. That is what this is all about. We need to be able to transcend our conditioned ways of thinking, our conditioned ways of doing things, And the trick to that is what we spoke about earlier, which is Soniye. That is the technology. That is the tool. We call it Naam Simran as well, but I'm not going to use this time to go into that, but it's all very related. So does a Gurmukh's life, I mean, are there any outward markers that we can recognize a Gurmukh? Probably not, because I think a Gurmukh's outer life may be quite conventional. We often make the mistake of thinking that if we see someone in a round pug and a long chola that is necessarily a Gurmukh. Not so. Could be, may not be. I think that a Gurmukh can appear to you in any kind of appearance. He could be dressed for Wall Street and be a Gurmukh. So outward appearances may be very conventional, but it's inwardly that a very different consciousness is at work. A very different consciousness is at work. Basically, where I'm going with all of this is that a Gurmukh or a Panch, one who is aligned to Dharam, is not really living for individual goals or accomplishments, biological, political, economic, but is thinking beyond the belly and is acting as an instrument of hukam. That's the big difference. And this is something that we need to cultivate. Very difficult, no doubt, but doable. It's not insurmountable. And it is the Panch or the Khalsa or the Gurmukhs who actually are working towards a new social blueprint based on the notion of Dharam that Guru Nanak has given us and Guru Arjan has referred to as Halimi Raj. This is the leap of consciousness that Guru Nanak has called for, and this is what Guru Gobind Singh basically institutionalized in the Khalsa. I wish I could stop and say are there any questions, but be that as it may, I will continue on. So I hope that I've given you some idea of why I raised this question, why I brought it up. To me, the distinction that Babaji, Guru Baba Patsha, Tan Guru Nanak is drawing here by saying Mannay, mugg, challey, panth, Mannay, Dharam, seti, sanbandh. It's an important distinction, and the importance lies in this. He's suggesting that true religion is concerned not so much with our ideas and beliefs about God, but with our experience. It's an experiential thing. So Dharam is the essence, or destination, if you will, of all religions. And their outward differences are simply a result of culture, geography, time, historical experience. So even has referred to that, right? So Sikhi speaks to that essence. It speaks to the essence of all religions. And hence the question, is it an organized religion? I leave that to you to figure out. But I believe that Sikhi is a heritage that belongs to all of humanity. I don't believe that Guru Nanak was simply speaking to a bunch of people who now call themselves Sikhs. And his caution, and stress on Dharam is also very consequential. You have to understand that it's a caution against sectarianism, because he obviously saw the consequences of that sectarianism during his own time. And it's also a reminder that we shouldn't lose sight of where the destination is, right? So ultimately, Guru Nanak, our great Guru, is constantly reminding us that we must strive to rise above our cultural conditioning. Because, as I said earlier, yes, we are born in a certain family, we pick up certain traits, we live in a certain culture, and we have to adopt certain practices no matter what. But we should be able to rise above our cultural conditioning and always keep the goal of Dharam in mind. And Dharam is alluded to in many, many places in Gurbani, as you all know. But in the context of this discussion, I would say that Guru Nanak asserts very clearly towards the end of the Guru Granth Sahib on page 1128 as a reference where he says that there is only one Dharam, and that Dharam is to be a witness to the truth. And how shall we become witnesses to that truth with a capital T? It is by becoming its ethical agent, also called a satyar. Kiv satyara hoye, kiv gur tutte pal, hukum rajai chalna, nanak likhya nal. So that is what he is referring to and advising us to basically do. So I pretty much wanted to share some of these thoughts with you, and of course welcome your input. Some of the questions that I have in my mind is how do we reconcile the apparent tension between cultural and religious conditioning to how do we sort of bring our worldly purposes to fall in line with our larger purpose, because it's a bit of a paradox, right? I mean, the very conditioning process that ensures our survival also is a barrier to sort of it also effectively shuts off our capacity to experience our true source. So how do we resolve this conflict between limiting and circumscribing demands of our haume, if you will, or empirical self, and the compulsion of our spirit, our man to jot sarup, and jot sarup wants to soar and be freed from the very restraints that tether us to our haume. How do we figure that out? This is something that I believe every Sikh life should be addressing. And with that said, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Happy to take questions.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I was actually on mute and I was speaking in the background, so I apologize. I got a question, Viji, from Simran or Simran Bansil. I hope I got the name right. If I did not, I apologize. And the question is, if Sikhi is not a religion, would that imply that a Christian, for example, could simultaneously be a Sikh or follow the Sikh path?
Okay, can you repeat that? I'm not sure I got the drift of that question.
Sorry. The question as it states here is, if Sikhi is not a religion, would that imply that a Christian, for example, could simultaneously be a Sikh or follow the Sikh path?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Let me respond to that question a little deliberately and with some circumspection. When I said, is Sikhi a religion, I was really questioning the fact that we seem to have lost its inner essence in our day-to-day lives, and in fact have become quite contented with all of the externals, whatever they may be. So I would say that it certainly has the markers of an organized religion. Indeed, it has a theology, it has institutions, it has practices. So I wouldn't go so far as to give you a categorical response and say, no, it isn't an organized religion. However, we just spoke about the fact that it speaks to the essence of all religions. And all religions share this essence of Dharam, at least as far as I understand it. So a Sikh who in my mind is on a development process, on a developmental process of spiritual formation, is like anybody else who's on a developmental process. I have Catholic friends, for example, and we often exchange notes. What surprises me is that a lot of our practices, at least privately, are very similar. So, I would say to you, yes, I mean, any seeker, I would say, is a Sikh, because that is what the word means. I hope that answers your question in some ways.
If you have any more questions, please don't hesitate to send them through the questions pane. If there are any thoughts that you have in mind, I'm sure other people would have the same thoughts also, so feel free to ask those questions. We'll wait for a few more minutes. And in the meantime, Guruji, would you have any closing comments? Because right now we don't have any questions.
Okay. I hope I didn't put you guys to sleep. I of course, am very interested in trying to live a Sikh life personally, and I do talk a great deal to my fellow Sikhs, and I also talk a great deal to others. I do recognize that, the average person really is not all that interested in these concepts, and that a lot of us want ready-made answers handed down to us. I am trying to, suggest to people that they ought to start looking to Gurbani. At least the Sikhs here amongst us should really take a little bit of time and spend time understanding Gurbani, its message, because I'll tell you this, the few friends that I have who have tried have come back to me and said, gee, I didn't realize that, Guru Nanak had such great stuff to tell me about how to live life. So the fact is that we have a treasure here within, amongst us, and we are really not tapping into it. That would be my message to my fellow Sikhs, is to really take the time, because I think you'll be blessed for it.
Okay, Guruji, I have a question from Amrik Singh, and he asks, 50 to 100 years ago, would the followers of Sikhi have been reminded of the kind of thoughts that you have been discussing? I'm not sure if I completely quite understand the question, but
I assume I understand the question. If I don't, I apologize. But my response to that would be, Gurbani is universal truth. It is true. Ad Sat Jugad Sat, Adi Sat Nanak Hosi Sat. So that is one thing that we need to bear in mind. It is universal truth. It's true always. However, every generation needs to revisit it, because we have different conditionings, we are at a different stage of our knowledge, different education. So I would say to you that every generation perhaps looks at the same truth a little differently. So 50 to 100 years ago, let's go back 100 years ago, the big emphasis then in Sikhi, as far as I can tell from my understanding, was on Sikh identity. The Singh Sabha movement was really indeed focusing on the fact that we were, a lot of mixed practices were spilling into the faith again, and their focus was to try and separate out the two, 100 years ago. Today, we live in the diaspora. A lot of us are exposed to a different system. A lot of our young people here are not carrying the baggage of, the culture from India. They're looking at Sikhi very differently. So I would suggest to you that it would only be natural for us to be taking different tacks on this truth that remains eternal and forever truth.
Okay, thank you, Virji. The question, or more of a clarification from Simon or Simon, is Guru Nanak Dev Ji, when he said, "I'm neither a Hindu or a Muslim," intended the message of Guru Granth Sahib to be global, for the whole of humanity, irrespective of religious or ethnic barriers. And he's or she is trying to clarify um, the statement that Guru Nanak Dev Ji made.
Is the questioner looking for an affirmation from me?
Most likely, yes.
Okay, I can answer that, and mind you, I want to be very cautious in suggesting to you that you know, my answers are obviously based on my own experience, my own understanding, which could be flawed. I'm the first one to admit that I could be mistaken, but my understanding, you know, when he said na ko Hindu na Musliman, is exactly how you are thinking. And I would also add that the attempt that our gurus made to actually compile the Guru Granth Sahib, which contained not only the works of the Sikh gurus but has Hindu Bhagats, Muslim peers present in there, it seems to suggest to me that they were definitely looking at a composite culture, you know, at least in the world that they inhabited, which was India. They were certainly looking to present to the world, as I said earlier, the essence of all religion. Yes, I would agree with how you've sort of taken it.
I will go ahead and ask the questions that are left. By the way, just wanted to have everybody who's on the call or who's on the webinar right now. Sometimes when we write questions, obviously we may not interpret the same way that you may have asked. So if there's a microphone that you like to use to ask a question, feel free to reach out to me through the questions pane or through the chat window, and we'll unmute you, and then you can go ahead and ask the question, and we can maybe better understand the essence of the question that you may have asked. Moving on. Give me one moment here. I just got a barrage of questions.
Okay.
This question is from Gurpreet Bindra, and the question is, doing Nitnem is a part of Sikhi. Is it more important to do Nitnem daily without understanding it, or to do just one part daily with understanding?
Okay, that's an excellent question, and Gurpreet, I will say that I have struggled with it myself. So let me just give you a sense of Nitnem and why perhaps the discipline of Nitnem. First off, I'm an advocate of certainly trying to understand what you're reciting, unquestionably. But I also feel that there is a certain rhythm and there is a certain music, there's a certain lilt in Gurbani itself that just singing it, can transport you into another consciousness, whether or not you understand the meaning of the words. But of course, understanding them very definitely, is much better. Now, is one part versus five? I will tell you that I have experimented differently. I have spent time in the mornings where I haven't done any Nitnem at all, but instead what I've done is I've engaged with Gurbani and tried to understand Gurbani, like some of these concepts that I've been talking about. So I'll pull out a few pages and try and understand. The important thing is where your awareness is at a given moment. I think that's more important. Now, I will say to you that when I was a teenager and I was young, I did go through the grind of name. I call it a grind because it is one, but it is a grind that certainly has some very desirable consequences. It's a disciplining process, and so from that perspective, the repetition and the daily doing of it is like acquiring any other skill. You know, whether it is learning how to hit a tennis racket, where you have to go and practice over and over and over again until, you know, it becomes part of your muscle memory. Same thing with Nitnem. It is a way of basically, you know, fencing off your mind from itself in some cases, and it's a technique. And we need to embrace it as such. And if you can understand what you're doing, then it only speeds up the process. And that was a long-winded answer.
Thank you, Virji. There's an observation made by Amar Singh, and may not have a question embedded, but just maybe something you wanted to share. And he says, making it a religion makes it easier to follow. That is, formulating it into a step-by-step process. When you encourage introspection from experience for inner development, you are talking about measuring intangibles, and that is difficult to do, even with Sangat. Thus, having Sri Guru Sahib is truly necessary. That was an observation. I'm not sure if you have any comment to that, Virji.
I agree. I agree that it is indeed difficult because we love to walk around with our armor. We don't want to be exposed. We are afraid. You know, we walk around with a certain degree of existential angst. I mean, it's just there. We are naturally anxious because we really don't have a firm footing on anything. So if you get a hand-me-down that says, do this, do this, do this, and you'll be okay, we are more likely to embrace it. We do that all the time. I mean, but when I say that you have to introspect, what I'm saying is that is a leap, that is a quantum leap that ultimately we all have to make, no matter how difficult. Because, you know, at the end of the day, it's Guru Amar Das who reminded us, you know, when asked, what should we read? And he said, Man ki patri vachiye pai. We have to really engage our own minds. And I'm not suggesting for a minute that it's easy. I'm not suggesting that this is something that, you know, will happen universally. Nonetheless, it is something that the Guru would want us to do.
Thank you, Virji. The next question is from Simran, who I had pronounced as Simran before. So thank you, Simran, for clarifying your name. And the question is, in your opinion, if a Sikh chooses to marry a non-Sikh, like a Christian, for example, is he then choosing a path that may be preventing him from finding the inner sense you speak of? Or can this coexistence be fruitful from a spiritual point of view?
Simran, I will give you what is a very personal response, so I hope I don't offend anyone. I've offended people in the past, but so what the heck. I will say this. I'm a great proponent of interfaith marriages, personally, because I think that this is one way to actually build tolerance in the world. Two, I don't believe that just because someone marries a non-Sikh that somehow he's now debarred from being a practicing Sikh or has lost that essence or cannot access that essence. I don't believe that is true at all.
Thank you, Virji. The next question is from Simon Rai, and the question is, how can we send the message of spirituality without appearing to be a religion?
Very simple, by practicing it. I will tell you that the best way to send a message across is to practice Sikhi. I don't think any amount of preaching to anyone is going to make any difference, even to kids. I mean, I have a daughter. I think she absorbs what I do more than what I say. And I think that when you talk about Sikhi, you'd better be living and walking the walk. That's one thing. I do have a word of caution, Simon, and that is we should be very careful when we make distinctions between religion and spirituality. Because oftentimes what happens is spirituality becomes a, I want to do my thing. It becomes some kind of a banquet. I pick a little bit from here, from there. It makes me feel good. And so I'm doing my thing. I'm being spiritual. I hear people say that a lot. I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. So in the context of Sikhi, though, I have to remind you that spirituality does not come without responsibilities. We talked about Helemi Raj, we talked about ethics, morality, we talked about, responsibility to society, to develop a society. So that you're not absolved of that responsibility. My sense of people who want to just practice spirituality is, you know what, I'm going to do my thing, just leave me alone. Well, sorry, that's not how I think I interpret Guru Nanak's message. So just that caution.
Thank you, Virji. This question is from an individual who actually prefers to be anonymous. And the question really is quite long. It may actually embed multiple questions. So let me know if you want me to read it out again for you. Let's get started here. If an individual lives each day of his life by doing Path and Simran, but at the same time lives with intolerance towards others, say anger issues, ego, no compassion, or not accepting, other people for who they are, what is going wrong? Is the Path and Simran purely an exercise, or a futile attempt to become a punch or a more evolved soul? And the individual goes on asking, why do we see this so much around us? And is Path and Simran needed for the Sunniya and Mannay path? And let me know if you want me to repeat that one more time.
Okay. Let me first respond to the very first thing that I grasped, whether it is a futile attempt, right? You're doing Path and Simran every day, and yet you're intolerant and full of anger, right?
Right.
I would say to you, whoever's asked the question, that's an absolute waste of time. I mean, if you're doing Path and Simran, and your demeanor is one of intolerance and anger and ego, then there's a disconnect, obviously. Because then Path and Simran have become nothing more than tools to basically feed your ego. So you definitely, I think going down the wrong track here. Okay, so that was the first that I picked up. And I wanted to add to that, remember we talked about Dharam, Dol Dharam, Daya Ka Poot. If there is a litmus test of whether there's spiritual formation happening, whether you're becoming religious, there is your litmus test. Dol Dharam, Daya Ka Poot, compassion. If you do not have compassion, you're nowhere near religion yet. I think that should be very clear. So there were other parts of this question, Jasdeep. Jasdeep, do you want to read the other parts?
Yes, thank you. I will. He said, obviously, we see a lot of this around us, and why is that? Also, is Path and Simran needed for the Sunniya and Mannay path? So you talked about Sunniya and Mannay, and he's saying,
yeah, sure. So why do we see a lot of it? Well, because we are all creatures of ego. I mean, it's very simple. We have not, and that was my request to you all, to really pause, stop, and take a look. You know, you need to do that because we don't, and therefore we live in ego, and you see a lot of that. Not surprising at all. You see it, I see it, but the important thing is not to see it in others, but to check yourself. I have at least, I'm sure I haven't succeeded all the time, but I try to essentially look inwards and see whether I'm acting out of ego or not every step of the way. And believe me, the inner voice is a very honest one. So yes, we see a lot of it around us and a lot of it is there. But I think we need to focus on ourselves and really leave others to their own devices. Let them find out the way themselves, because ultimately that is what we have to do. Now, is Path and Simran necessary for Suniya Mannay? Well, Simran and Suniya Mannay, as I said, you know, I made a statement there that this is really related. Suniya Mannay, Man Kita Pao, which is the result, is really no different from what we call Naam Simran, Naam Japna. Now you have got to realize that, you know, the methodology within Sikhi, and I'm speaking in terms of an organized religion, is a very holistic one. So there's Path, there's Simran, there is Seva, there is Kirtan. It just all, which is why we talked about being integrated personalities and not just one-dimensional personalities. It also calls for a lot of community activism. And I think that is something that I, for years and years and years, didn't understand, frankly. I got personally lost down the track of just Simran and, you know, trying to do my thing and not want to bother, until I started to really examine Guru Nanak. And I said, oh my God, I've been, you know, in error all these years. You've got to be very active, you know, community activism. You've got to stand up for justice. You've got to make your voice heard. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Guruji. That was the last question. And I'd like to thank you all for all your questions, and apologies for those whose questions may not have been addressed due to time constraints or otherwise. And so if you have more questions, do send them across to info@sikhri.org, and those questions will be answered appropriately. Guruji, would you like to have any more additional closing comments, or this might be the end of it?
I appreciate the input, I appreciate the questions, and I do thank you very, very much for joining with me here. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa,
Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. The next webinar is coming up this month again on, I believe it's the March 21st. But go to www.sikhri.org and you would be able to find the next date for it, and you should be able to find a link for registration also. And we look forward to seeing most of you again in the next webinar. As I said, thank you all for joining again, and hopefully you found the talk valuable. When I end the webinar, there will be a small feedback window that opens up. If you could take a few minutes of your valuable time and let us know how we did in our effort to make these webinars more exciting and more informational for you guys, and actually do a better job next time. Thank you very much again, and thank you for our presenter, Ravinder Singh Ji. And you guys have a good one today. Thank you so much. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.